Hello there, my name is Joshua Seigal. I am a poet and I'm really excited to be here for you today as part of Cressida Summer Creativity Camp, which is really exciting. And what I'm going to do for you today is I am going to explain a little bit about myself, about what I do, and I'm also going to give you some of my top poetry writing tips. Now, I am known for writing various poetry books. For example, this book, which is my latest book, which is called Welcome to My Crazy Life. And before that was this anthology, which is called I Bet I Can Make You Laugh. This book was the winner of the 2020 Lollies Book Award, so that's very exciting. And a little bit later, I'm going to be sharing with you a poem from this book, which is called I Don't Like Poetry. Now, one of the things I do as a poet is not just write books, not just read and perform poetry. I actually go around and I visit schools all across the UK and even abroad very often. And what I do when I visit schools is I try and show people, and this is people of all ages, right the way from 3 years old to adulthood. So I try and show people of all ages how they can write their very own poems. Now, there's no right or wrong way of writing a poem, but what there are is some top tips that you might find very helpful. So what I would like to do for you in this video is share with you some of my top poetry writing tips. Now, tip number one is to write about something that you are interested in, or put another way, something that you know about, something that you care about, something that speaks very closely to you and your personality and your interests. Now, I remember when I studied poems at school, I wasn't that into poetry, and I think one of the reasons I wasn't that into poetry is because we were made to read poems about things that I didn't really know much about, things that I didn't really care much about. Were we to read a poem about things like football? Were we to read poems about things like Batman? Were we to read poems about things like dinosaurs? In other words, things that I was interested in, I think I would have shown a lot more interest in poetry. So tip number one, in fact, goes for both reading and writing poetry. So try to seek out to read things that you are interested in and try to write about things that you are interested in, whatever that may be. I mentioned Batman, football and dinosaurs. You might be interested in clouds and flowers and butterflies. You might be interested in aeroplanes. Whatever you're interested in, that will help to bring heart, that will help to bring soul to your poetry writing. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is to use your five senses. Your five senses are some of your key poetry writing ingredients. So once you've thought about something that interests you, maybe see if you can describe it, or see if you can describe your experiences whilst experimenting with different senses. So for example, don't just talk about what you can see. Also talk about the things you can hear, what you can touch. Are there any smells that you remember that conjure up important information, that conjure up important memories? So use your five senses. That is top poetry writing tip number two. And poetry writing tip number three is closely related to that. As well as your five senses, some more poetry writing ingredients would be your memory and your emotions. I like to write a lot. So a lot of people ask me, where do I get my ideas from? Now, one place where I often get ideas is simply by thinking back to my childhood. Some of the things that I remember one of my, the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me was going up to a stranger on the beach and hugging her and calling her mummy. And that was, for some reason, that's just a memory that's lodged deep within my mind. And I wrote a poem about that in this book. I don't like poetry. So use your memory and also use your emotions. Try and don't just describe what happens. Try and bring in some emotions to describe how you felt. So your five senses, your memory and your emotions, those are some of the key poetry writing ingredients. I often think of poetry as a little bit like baking a cake. You don't start by putting the cake in the oven. You start by gathering together some of the ingredients that you will need. So that's an example of some of the ingredients. Another tip I would give, and this is tip number 1, 2, 3, tip number 4. There we go. I can count to 4. Tip number 4. Often my poetry is quite jokey. So sometimes I'll have a punchline. So in this book, Welcome to My Crazy Life, there is a poem about noise. The poem's called What's That Noise? And there's a little joke at the end of the poem explaining what that noise is. So the person in the poem hears lots of all kinds of crazy things. What could that noise possibly be? The joke at the end of the poem is in this book. And what I would say in relation to that is sometimes when you're writing a poem, it's a good idea to try to think of your ending first. Maybe the ending is your brother falling down the stairs. Maybe the ending is scoring the winning goal in a football match. Maybe the ending is blowing up your teacher with dynamite. Don't do that. But sometimes it might be a good idea to try and think of your conclusion before you actually start writing the poem. And that's a piece of advice that really helps me in my poetry writing. The final piece of advice, and this is maybe the most important piece of poetry writing advice that I use when I visit schools, when I visit places where I'm running poetry writing workshops, is that your poem does not have to rhyme. Very important. A lot of people think poetry has to rhyme. It does not. There are very many other poetry writing techniques that you can use instead of rhyming. And with that in mind, I would like to finish by reading a poem from this book, which is called I Don't Like Poetry, published by Bloomsbury in 2016. This poem is about some of the other poetry writing techniques other than rhyme, which you might not want to use. It goes like this. I don't like similes. Every time I try to think of one, my brain feels like a vast empty desert. My eyes feel like raisins floating in an ocean. My fingers feel like sweaty sausages. I don't like metaphors. Whenever I attempt them, a hammer starts beating in my chest. Lava starts bubbling in my veins. Zombies have a fight in my stomach. I don't like alliteration. We learnt about it in school, but it's seriously, stupendously silly. Definitely, drastically difficult. Terribly, troublingly tricky. I don't like onomatopoeia. I wish I could blow it up with a zap and a bang and a crash, a boom and a clang and a pow, a clash and a bam and a thud. And I don't like repetition. I don't like repetition. I don't like repetition. We've got another 10 minutes of this. I'm joking. So that poem, obviously, those were all kinds of different poetry writing techniques. I like to use that poem to introduce people to those techniques, and they are techniques you can use as a poet other than rhyming. As I said, my name is Joshua Seigal. Please visit my website. That's www.joshuaseigal.co.uk. And Seigal is spelt Seigal. Also, very important, please visit the Children's Laureate website for lots more fantastic, fantabulous, wonderful writing tips. Thank you so much for having me as part of Cressida Cowell's Creativity Summer Camp. And I look forward to seeing your work. Thank you very much.